All right, good afternoon. I am thrilled to see all of your faces here at the School of Education in our temporary space here at Mount Washington, which, just to put a plug in, we're going to be here till December of 2025, after which we will be moving into our brand new fully renovated building at 2800 block of North Charles, the old Seton High School building where we were previously, and you can come visit us there as well, of course. I am Chris Morphew, Dean of the School of Education here at Johns Hopkins, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to the dedication of the Robert E. Slavin Endowed Professorship and the installation of Steve Ross as the inaugural professor. I want to thank everybody who's found time to be here today with us. This is a really great day for the School of Education. In particular, I want to reach out and thank a few people. One is President Ron Daniels, who you'll be hearing from in a few minutes. Second, Nancy Madden and Nancy's family, which is sitting over there and is a fairly large group, and I know they're looking forward to all the festivities. Steve Ross and Steve's family. We have members of the National Advisory Council who are online, School of Education faculty and staff, and alumni friends and honored guests. We're going to kick things off with a short video, and then you're going to hear back from me in just a second.
He was my hero in the education sciences for a reason. And the reason was he was an eminent scholar to start with. Everything he did in the field was of high quality and of high importance.
He was my model of what a really knowledgeable and rigorous person is. He wasn't offensive. He had a sense of humor about it. He was very, he wasn't arrogant at all about it.
That I was quite surprised that he was willing to talk to me at all, because I was a PhD student at the University of Heidelberg, so a total nobody, and I'm sure that he had a lot of other contacts to talk to, but he did, and it was impressive, very impressive, right from the start.
Bob's commitment to evidence-based education, his passion for improving student outcomes, and his tireless efforts to bridge the gap between research and practice have left an indelible mark on our field. His influence extends far beyond the national borders, and his contributions to education in China and the Asia region are a testimony to his boundless energy and dedication.
Bob Slavin had no qualms about questioning norms and questioning why things were the way they were.
He was summarily focused on making the largest possible difference for kids from underrepresented, disadvantaged backgrounds.
He always thought big. I remember sitting with him once, and we were working on holidays trying to draft something about how to tutor every kid in the state of Maryland who needed tutoring.
So he was not afraid to think big. Nancy was also really, really good. She understood the issues. She and Bob worked on a team on the big ideas.
So Bob is the scientist, but also he can be very practical. But if you really want to solve problems inside the classroom, you really need Nancy, because Nancy is really hands-on.
I thoroughly look forward to meeting him when I did. He is very balanced, very motivational, and very inspiring. And
his passion and endless relentlessness, I think inspired all of us and made a difference in the lives of over 3 million children, which is certainly his legacy. And I think this chair is a terrific start at being able to keep his vision.
The opportunity to have and celebrate the installation and the moving forward of an endowed chair in Bob Slavin's honor helps keep the legacy and the life and the laughter and the wisdom of Bob Slavin alive.
I know Steve and Bob worked together for years. So Steve understood where Bob's thoughts were and sort of where Bob would have taken things and all of his philosophy around education. And I think Steve also has a deep, deep desire to improve outcomes for students.
If over time, more of what we see instantiated in practice is linked to things we know make the biggest possible difference for kids, we're making progress. We're not going to get it all at once. It's going to take time, which is my last word. Why creating a chair, a professorship, is also wonderfully important, because it creates the time and space to continue to chip away at the things that mattered so fundamentally to Bob and Nancy.
And yes, Nancy and Steve, we got that last picture in there of Nanjing for you. Exactly. What you just saw in that video is why we're here today, to honor a legacy that is very much alive. Alive in the rigorous approach we take at the Johns Hopkins School of Education and across the university, alive in the implementation of evidence-based practices in schools across the globe, and alive in the impact of improved learning for millions of children. This is the legacy of Bob Slavin. We're here to celebrate its inspiration and its relevance as it passes into our stewardship in the form of the Robert E. Slavin Endowed Professorship. Through the generosity, foresight, and commitment of the person who really gets things done, Professor Nancy Madden, Bob's wife and research partner, and via the ongoing dedication, wisdom, and excellence-based expertise of our very deserving friend and colleague, Stephen M. Ross. Today, you will hear from University President Ron Daniels, who will officially dedicate this remarkable endowed position in honor of Bob Slavin. And you will hear from Professor Nancy Madden, co-creator and collaborator and partner in so many initiatives and achievements for which Bob is revered, including their wonderful family who join us here today. You will hear from research professor Jennifer Morrison of the Center for Research and Reform in Education on the commitment and character of Steve Ross, who serves as the director of CRE. And you will hear, of course, from Steve himself, the inaugural professor, who can tell us more about his research, his goals, his thoughts about exciting research, which will be a privilege in and of itself. And you will hear from me just a little bit longer, because this is a particularly momentous occasion for the School of Education. Few gifts make a larger impact to a university than an endowed professorship. And this is only our second at the School of Education. We're working on the third very, very quickly here. The first, the Jeffrey A. Grigg Professorship, honors a wonderful, talented young professor who died suddenly in 2019. Jeff Grigg inspired us with his intense desire to improve children's physical and mental health outcomes, as well as their educational outcomes. The professorship endowed by the Grigg family in his name carries on that inspiration, recognizing a promising early career faculty member whose primary focus was research. I had dinner with Jeff's father, Doug, just last week in San Francisco, and was pleased to tell him how his gifts to the School of Education have contributed to Jeff's lasting legacy and honored the work Jeff did during his time here as a faculty member in the School of Education. Today, although we may feel a pang of loss, we have the opportunity to be similarly inspired and reminded of a legacy. The work we do, the work to which Jeff Grigg and Bob Slavin were so committed, that work is desperately important. In education, the stakes are very, very high. We're not just saving lives, we're trying to save futures. And that's what this professorship is about, the future. It ensures a continuing source of financial support for leaders in the field like Steve, and allows us to acknowledge and uplift their work in the Johns Hopkins tradition of excellence in research and teaching, but more importantly, in the expectations of improved education outcomes for children. And so, on behalf of the Johns Hopkins School of Education, I want to thank Nancy Madden and all of the generous donors who have supported the Slavin Professorship. I can assure you it means a lot. And now it is my great privilege to introduce Johns Hopkins University President Ronald Daniels. It's wonderful to have Ron here to join us in this celebration. We're grateful, Ron, for your attendance at this important event and for your continued support of the School of Education.
I'll do that. I think it's okay. Well, thank you so much, Chris, and good afternoon all on this really, really important day in the life of not just the School of Education, but indeed the university as a whole. And so I am, of course, honored to dedicate the Robert E. Slavin Endowed Professorship on Bob's birthday, no less, with his family, his wife, and lifelong professional partner, Nancy, here with us, their children. And why don't you just wave when I sort of call you out? So their children, Benjamin, Jacob, and Rebecca. Great. Grandchildren. Grandchildren are here. Ava, Adea, and Leo. Yahoo. His siblings, his brother Daniel, his sister Julia, and her husband John, and his brother Tom, and his wife Brondi. Welcome to you all. It's just great you're here on this occasion. I'm delighted, of course, to recognize Steve Ross, one of, as you've heard, Bob's closest colleagues, as the first recipient of this professorship, alongside Steve's daughter Jamie, his son Andrew, and his sister Lori. Wave to as well, please, so we can all see you. They're here in the front row. Good. So now that we've got all the family recognized, honored, and there's still 2 or 3 people left over, it is my great privilege to formally accept this professorship. So it's official, it's done. We now have the Slavin Professorship at the School of Education, the second professorship. Congratulations all. Now, typically at this point in the program, I would start my remarks with a story, maybe some kind of historical anecdote that perfectly captured the singular contributions of our honoree. That's the way the script goes. But Bob, a blogger extraordinaire, stole all the material, so I'm kind of dry. Over the course of a decade, Bob authored blog posts nearly every single week, drawing on an extraordinary range of stories, from Babe Ruth's called shot home run to Roald Amundson's path-breaking expedition to the South Pole to the origins of the internet. And of course, we know that was Al Gore invented the internet. To illustrate the impact of rigorous research and evidence on our understanding of seemingly intractable educational challenges. But the one story Bob did not tell, on the internet at least, was his own, an extraordinary story befitting one of his signature blog posts. And you see, it begins at Reed College, of course, in the late 1960s, with Bob, a starry-eyed undergraduate, gripped in hours-long conversation about school reform with his fellow classmate, Nancy. I'm sure it wasn't every minute devoted to school reform, but lots were. You can elaborate if you choose to in a few moments. But so gripped was he by Nancy and the conversation that he had that he did not often notice that the rain was pouring down on them and they were simply drenched. But so enraptured were they with one another and with ideas that they didn't notice. From these conversations came a transformational lifelong partnership anchored by 2 foundational beliefs: a vision of a future in which every public school student succeeds, and an unshakable conviction that schools can only deliver on that vision by following the evidence to discover, in Bob's simple words, what works? What works? With Nancy by his side, Bob devoted his life to delivering on this commitment, designing game-changing whole school reform programs like Success for All, which now transforms the reading outcomes for hundreds of thousands of students every year, year in and year out. That came from Bob, that came from Baltimore. It's an amazing, when we think about the impact of our ideas our initiatives, our industrial creativity. This is top of mind in terms of our legacy that we bequeath to our communities, to our country. He also authored reams of pages of proven actionable solutions that policymakers have leveraged in implementing national education laws like the Every Student Succeeds Act, and educators have adopted in bringing what works to classrooms literally across the globe. But Bob's story, as amazing, as extraordinary, as impactful as it was, does not stop there. And indeed, his impact on individual lives is only outmatched by the transformational impact he had on our institution. So here, I want to get a little bit personal because, as many of you know, in early 2007, the School of Education emerged as a standalone unit from the formal School of Professional Studies in Business Education. At that point, largely focused on part-time degrees and continuing education programs. And I got here in 2009, and there was lots of discussion about what this school was, what it wanted to be, how we would think about the trajectory of that school in the life of the university. And one of the things that I felt almost from the first instant when I got here was this school has to look like every other division of the university. Of course, our teaching mission is important. Of course, the ways in which we provide service, education, counseling, support to schools throughout the region is important. But fundamentally, to be a school on par, to stand shoulder to shoulder with every other school of the university, we need a deeper, more impressive level of research activity embedded within it. And that's, of course, where Bob and Nancy came in, because it was not clear at the outset that Bob would be here and remain associated with other parts of the university. But we felt it was really important that it be here. And I can remember the conversations that we had with Lloyd Minor and others as we basically went to Bob and others, Nancy, and said, we really want you to join with the school, bring your research activity, bring the center, give this the research core that models this idea of the nexus between research and education and impact that is the very heart of our university. That happened, I think, really is as important as the first act of independence when we created the school in 2007, but that really gave it, I think, such an important bolus of support and a direction that brings the school to where it is today, in which I would dare say, but for inclusion of this and the other research centers that are now firmly and proudly housed in the school would be a bare, I think, fraction of the amazing institution it is today. So I think it starts with an acknowledgement of how important that was for the university. I'll also say, as much as Bob helped us realize the vision for this school, he never lost sight of the individuals, the students at the heart of his work. He never stopped sweating the details, always able to enter any classroom and suss out any number of factors potentially impacting student success, whether it was access to eyeglasses or the mode of reading instruction. And here again, there was another moment with Bob that was really important in the life of this institution, and that was when we made the decision to start the Henderson Hopkins School. And I will say that, again, for those of you who weren't here at the inception, there was a lot of deep skepticism about the idea that we would have a school, K-8 school, associated with the university, run by the university as a way of requiting our obligations, our commitments to the community. There was a lot of doubt. It was not at all clear when we were planning a school, and I got here in 2008, when we were planning a school, that the School of Education indeed would have any role whatsoever in the creation and the support for the Henderson Hopkins School. And sure enough, as we got the school up and running, we finally persuaded the community and the city and the various stakeholders to go with this idea. As we got this up and running, we clearly began to recognized the magnitude of the challenges we faced in that school and the need for interventions to provide more support, more structure, more encouragement to our students. Again, we went back to Bob and Nancy and said, we need your help on this. We need you actually to invest in this program and help us figure it out. And again, the adoption of the Success for All model and the integration into our school in those early years was really important in terms of our establishment of the credibility and the commitment we made to the community. So for me, the legacy of Bob is powerful and profound at so many different levels, but in very personal ways, so many things that have been important to me and to other of us in the center of the university in terms of how we understand our commitment to Baltimore was very much a story of Bob's encouragement and support. So I'm just obviously delighted that we celebrate Steve as the inaugural holder of this chair. He, of course, is an integral part of the story as head of the evaluation unit of Bob's Center for Education, Research, and Reform. In fact, over nearly 40 years, Steve collaborated with Bob to illuminate proven practice in hundreds of articles on topics as assorted as educational technology, out-of-school learning, and STEM instruction. And like Bob, he's continually engaged educators and policymakers from Congress to NSF to ensure that what works becomes practice. Today, as the director of the Center for Educational Research and Reform, Steve embodies Bob's legacy, embracing the power of evidence to deliver success for all students. So it seems only fitting that he now do so now as a Slavin Endowed Professor in the Johns Hopkins School of Education. Congratulations again, Steve. And to Nancy and to the Slavin family, I'm grateful that we can honor Bob with this professorship, an homage to his incredible life and a vision we are much closer to realizing by dint of his incredible commitment, his excellence, his creativity, his passion. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, President Daniels. As you may have heard, Bob was more than a prominent and influential faculty member and blogger. He was legendary. He was our member of the National Academy of Education. He was the de facto standard of assessment for integrity in education research. He was Mr. Evidence. He was the guy. But you couldn't really get him to admit that, not because he was humble, but because none of it mattered to him. What mattered to him was actually making a difference for millions of children. And because he knew that so many of his achievements would have been impossible without a very wise expert at his side, one who didn't mind the rain, apparently, he needed a gifted thinker who could both check his assumptions and fuel the bold ideas. That person is Nancy Madden. Early in his career here at Johns Hopkins, Bob made his first big splash in education research with the study of cooperative learning, when students work together to advance their understanding. I was actually using some of that in the early 90s in my project with Liz Cohen at Stanford on cooperative learning. Now, it occurs to me that he was probably inspired by the remarkable example of cooperative learning that he shared throughout his life with Nancy. Together, they launched Success for All, the first real comprehensive model to show the kind of broad impact and staying power needed to make long-term improvements in thousands of schools. As CEO of Success for All, Nancy has presided over the development and dissemination of that model in schools around the globe. She has been a Johns Hopkins expert in literacy and instruction since 1980 and has published widely on cooperative learning, the education of disadvantaged students, and many other subjects. Nancy's latest effort is guiding forward another Bob Slavin collaboration, the proventutoring.org site and work, which leads a coalition of organizations that provide evidence-based tutoring programs across the United States. Everyone, please welcome the woman who made this gift possible, Nancy Madden.
It is a fantastic pleasure to be here today at the inauguration of this endowed chair. And I'm so glad that all of you are here with me. You know, first I want to thank my family and kids and grandkids for being here, and the Slavin family for being here, because Bob's greatest passion was first his family. And you saw some of the joy that he took in being with people. Well, he took all of that joy in being first with his family and friends. And today, of all days, we miss him because of that. But what a gift we are giving him on this birthday of his. So it's a pleasure to have you all here on this very special gift to Bob. I'm not sure what I can say. I was going to say a lot of those things that everybody else said a lot better than I could ever have said them. So I'm going to sort of skip to two things. One is I just want to give a sense of the job that's still left. I mean, what Bob did was an amazing amount of work to build a concept that evidence was the bottom line, was crucial in designing what schools did with kids, that it was important to measure, are we meeting the goals? Are we getting where we need to go? And that was not necessarily very important at the outset, because in education, oftentimes it's the new idea, the bright, shiny object that matters and that leads people to what they do in education. But that wasn't true to Bob or to either of us as we sat in the rain talking about what to do, which we really did. And, you know, in Portland, it's very gentle rain, so you didn't really get wet. So I wanted to talk a little about a story in the 74 million, you know, that Ed newsletter that many of us read. On September 10th, there was an article that said, which districts do the best job teaching reading? If you haven't noticed, the science of reading is a big thing these days. And so the 74 was looking at the data. They put up, and if I'd been Jennifer, I would have made a slide. They gathered all of the data points for the percent of kids in third grade, at the end of third grade in Ohio, to make the observation that there's a regression line and that kids from wealthy districts are up here and kids from poor districts are down here, so that, you know, reading seems to mostly be correlated with the quality of the economics in the community rather than instruction, except for the data points that aren't. So way up here on the lower, you know, on the high poverty end of the regression line was this yellow dot that they picked out. And they noted that that yellow dot was for Steubenville City School District. That's a school district that has been using Success for All for 25 years. In this high poverty district, 99% of the third graders are proficient in reading by the end of third grade. Well, that's not an accident, but there's only one dot up there. Somehow we haven't gotten the message that it's possible to teach reading, that we know how to teach reading, and that we have a responsibility to teach reading. The other part of that story is that for all that there is all this discussion about the science of reading, we don't know how to apply it yet because there is just that one dot. In 2024, because this data was the 2024 data, there's only that one dot poking up out of the norm. And so we have work to do, and that is the job of this chair is to make sure that that work continues. You know, it wasn't just Bob or even, that's my phone. That's the phone that goes off every afternoon at 3:30 when I'm getting ready to go pick up my grandkids. So, and I forgot to turn it off. I apologize. So this work is enormous work. It's incredibly hard work. Because education is back where medicine was, you know, a century or so ago, where it is what feels good to people is what gets done, what seems right, not that people aren't working hard at it, but the data wasn't important in medicine until about 30 years ago, and now it guides everything. And we need to get there in education, and it's going to take all the people that are not my family in this room. They support in other ways, as it has over the last decades, as Steve has been involved over the decades, as Susan and Cynthia and Marta and Amanda, not forgetting you over there, because Amanda was, you know, Bob's right arm, and carrying on the blog tradition is Amanda's job right now. So it's very important. Steve, you know that. It's very important to keep Amanda happy. So the job is a big one. It is nowhere near over. And the purpose of this chair, my excitement about getting this chair inaugurated today and having Steve occupy the chair is that it marks the commitment of the university to the work that needs to be done to continue to make a difference for kids, because we're not there yet. So we have sort of a global network, a global village of people working on these issues. And I guess that's the beauty of this day and age, where we can work, you know, anywhere in the world. And there is an amazing network of people working together, putting together websites, evidenceforessa.org and proventutoring.org, things that speak to practitioners in real ways to help them improve practice and help them understand what it means to be accountable to the evidence every day for every kid, to make sure that we really get to that goal of using what the evidence says works to make kids successful. I think that Steubenville is something we all have to pay attention to. We can, first of all, teach kids to read by third grade. That's sort of one of the basic goals. We know how to do it, we can do it. We have a responsibility to, so we have to keep getting there. So that's what I think we're doing here with this endowment, is really making sure that the global village stays focused, that it's a center of conversation, of discussion, of inspiration to keep this task going. I want to end with a story that sort of describes the passion and the focus and the importance of the work to Bob and to me. In the 90s, we were involved with Success for All in a number of places, and we had a project going on in St. Mary's County, and we started, it was the first year with the school, and a lot of kids weren't reading by third grade at that time in the school, and in particular, there was one child who was a fourth grader when we started, and we got started at the beginning of the year, you know, put all the various systems in place. And we came back in the spring for a visit, and this particular fourth grader had made a lot of progress that year. We had placed him, the system placed him in a first grade classroom because he wasn't reading. He was reading at a first grade level. He needed first grade skills. So Success for All puts him in a first grade classroom if that's the case. So we came back, and his mother happened to be visiting the principal the day that we were there. And she was telling the principal how well he was doing now. He was actually no longer reading at a first grade level, but was reading at an end of second grade level by the spring. And she brought with her a box. You know, she wanted to just share her pleasure, but she brought this box that she described as her son's treasure box. And inside this treasure box were the stories that he had learned to read from. They were the curriculum from the first grade reading program. And he had collected all of these books and put them in this box. And what he said was, I'm going to keep these because I want to have them so that I can teach my son to read when he's growing up. So it was life-changing for this child, for this family, and that's what we need to do. We need to change the lives for all children so that they can all be successful. So my next job is to invite Jennifer up to the podium. And Jennifer Morrison is an associate research professor at the Center for Research and Reform in Education and works closely with Steve Ross and has for many, many years as the deputy director of the evaluation team at CRRE. And she'll share a few words about Steve and his work. Please join me in welcoming Jennifer Morrison.
Everyone's joking that I have slides, but I don't know how to speak without slides, so. I was asked to speak about Dr. Steve Ross and his impact, so I thought I'd start with his earliest mentor. Most elementary school children don't learn about Piaget's theory of conservation, but I did. Steve's influence on me began when I was pulled out of elementary school one day to be filmed judging liquid volumes in various size glasses, and I did really well. Another day, I was filmed with my younger brother. We were asked about a pizza and which would be bigger, one cut into a few slices as compared with one cut into many slices. The answer was obvious, but my brother flunked. Steve taught me that day that my little brother may not be the brightest bulb in the box. I later found out that Steve had developed these videos for Bob Slavin's textbook. I will say I had a little traumatic experience in my learning theories class in grad school when my professor said he was going to show us a video on YouTube. So fast forward 20-some years when I finally came to my senses. The first semester in my instructional design program used a textbook that Steve had co-authored. I completely fell in love with the field, and I suppose one could say it's because of this text, the 5th edition of Designing Effective Instruction. I thought the 5th edition was great, but man, the 8th edition was something else. I read quite a lot of Steve's work during my graduate courses. As a kid, I had no idea what a big deal he was, but I definitely learned so during grad school. So in Foundations of Instructional Technology, there was one of his articles on In Search of a Happy Medium with instructional technology research. In Evaluation, we learned about the role of evaluation in instructional design. And then Advanced Instructional Design, we read one of his papers. And then Trends and Issues, we read 3. The last one, Delivery Trucks or Groceries, more food for thought on whether media, or technology, will, may, can't influence learning. Steve is always great with his analogies. And then at CRE, Steve's really driven home the importance of mixed methods. In grad school, I was very happy in the quantitative world, and one professor and I even joked I should try to get a waiver for the required qualitative research course. Well, Steve threw me to the wolves when I joined CRE, and I was the lead evaluator on a study for the Gates Foundation. I fell in love with qualitative research, talking with stakeholders and using that narrative to tell a more robust story than quantitative research alone. Steve also helped me to land the 5-year evaluation of a technology integration initiative with Baltimore County Public Schools. I had this great idea to approach the superintendent, but obviously had zero experience to actually land them as a client. Well, Steve had a great track record with tech integration initiatives and sealed the deal. And then in about 2018, Bob Slavin approached me about updating his 2013 meta-analysis examining educational technology and mathematics. I told him I'd be happy to, but we needed to do it the right way. Coming back to that grocery store analogy of Steve's, his work was a critical argument in my proposal to IES to conduct a meta-analysis on edtech and mathematics. And while I know Steve isn't the biggest fan of meta-analyses, I used that foundational argument of technology as a delivery mechanism to influence how edtech is examined. But don't just take my word for Steve being amazing. I reached out to some researchers who have either worked directly with him or have been influenced by his work. So let's start with an early student at the University of Memphis. Dr. Linda Lohr wrote, "I can't think of anyone more deserving. Steve was a wonderful teacher and boss who time and again helped me, often during times I needed kindness. I thought he had an amazing ability to read crowds and to speak at a level that engaged people. He is a strong leader, and many times I worked with him on projects. He had a lot of tolerance towards those that were not as gifted as him." And Dr. John Nunnery, another former student. "I met Steve Ross before the web browser was invented, but after professors were no longer allowed to smoke in classrooms. He has been a constant in my life for more than 3 decades as teacher, mentor, advisor, boss, colleague, and friend. Before I met him, I was unsure about what career path I would take. I switched from pre-med to business and graduated with a degree in history. I then somehow got into graduate forestry school, but instead of learning how to save the rainforest, I was learning how to make plywood and toilet paper. I moved back to Memphis, and the only job I could find that wasn't waiting tables was at the Boys Club. That is still the best job I have ever had, except for working for Steve, Bob, or Nancy, of course. I decided to become a teacher, but after completing my MIT, I discovered that newly minted history teachers were not in high demand. So I decided to continue in a PhD program. My first semester, I had a pivotal encounter with Steve, who was teaching my stats course. There were large windows at the back of the classroom overlooking the tennis complex, where I had been playing tennis for a few hours, right up to the time class started, and that day was the midterm exam. I walked in, sweaty with racket in hand, and completed the 50-item test in less than 10 minutes. I will never forget the look Steve gave me when I turned the exam in. I thought, maybe I should look into this research thing a little further. The most pivotal point in my career was when, a year or so later, Steve asked me to be the quantitative analyst and PowerPoint producer-in-chief for the Alabama educational disparity lawsuit. The verdict on that case was very positive. It was through Steve's example and abiding support on that and many other projects that my passion for civil rights, love of public education, intellectual curiosity, and analytic skills were forged into what has been a great career that I could never have imagined possible way back when. I learned that educational research can have a real impact on people's lives. Steve introduced me to Bob and Nancy, who have been perhaps the 2 greatest inspirations to me, not just professionally or even mostly professionally, but as exemplars of grace, joy, compassion, visionary leadership, and commitment to fight the good fight. Steve is a prolific scholar, authentic educator, master communicator, skillful diplomat, artful politician, and medium good humorist. I can think of no one more fitting person than Steve Ross to inaugurate the Robert E. Slavin Endowed Professorship. And then Dr. Linda Bohl. Professor Stephen Ross had a great influence on me as a role model and a mentor. When I was a new assistant professor at the University of Memphis, he offered advice and encouragement. For example, when I was struggling as a new instructor in a research course developed for a cohort class, he advised me to divide and conquer as a classroom management strategy. Though I was dubious, it worked and still works. Steve strongly supported and encouraged me in my research. Early in my career, he invited me to serve as a program evaluator on a large grant entitled New American Schools. This led to numerous conference papers, publications, and future grant work. Perhaps more importantly, this experience afforded a networking opportunity with other educators in K-12 and college contexts. Steve has had a tremendous influence on the field of educational psychology and K-12 education more generally. His overarching goal has been to improve educational opportunities for all children. He embraces a commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and did so well before it became a popular phrase and practice. He shares this mission with Dr. Robert Slavin, honored by this endowed professorship. I wish him every success in this new position. And then Dr. Gary Morrison. One day after I had finished teaching one of my classes in 1985, I was returning a massive TV to the Resource Center at the University of Memphis. Steve, though we had not formally met, stopped me and asked if he could watch the basketball game on the TV. I replied that the season was over as Indiana was out of the tournament. He gave me a perplexed look, but I told him to take the TV to his office and I would see if I could find something to make an antenna. That by-chance meeting started a lifelong research collaboration, although Steve told me he was just promoted a full professor and no longer needed to do any research. It started as a mentorship and evolved into a unique collaboration with each of us approaching our research from two different perspectives, bringing different approaches to designing and developing each study. Our research produced over 25 refereed articles. Steve was great at creating opportunities for me to publish, present, and to collaborate on grants. His skill as a mentor is probably best noted as the editor of the research section of Educational Technology Research and Development. When you submitted a manuscript for publication, Steve gave it a thorough review. Using his critique and those of the reviewers, he was very generous and thorough in offering advice and direction on how to revise the manuscript for publication in ETR&D or for another journal. Congratulations on being named the inaugural chair of the Robert E. Slavin Endowed Professorship. I assume you've told everyone that you no longer need to publish any articles. And Dr. James Klein wrote, Steve Ross helped make me a better researcher. Trained as a logical positivist, my first study on collaborative learning included several quantitative outcome measures. Upon submitting the manuscript to the journal Steve was editing, he told me that studies on collaboration are strengthened by observing student interactions. From then on, all my collaborative learning studies included direct observations of how teams work together. Dr. Robert Reeser wrote, I have known Steve Ross for about 40 years and have always been impressed with him, both as an outstanding scholar and as a truly kind and caring person. Steve's professional accomplishments are too numerous to describe in the few sentences that I've been asked to write about him, so I'll mention just one that stands out in my mind. For what I think was 15 years, Steve was the editor of the research section of ETR&D, one of the premier research journals in the educational technology field. In all the years he held that post, he did an outstanding job of making sure that the articles that were published in it were of the highest quality. He did so by carefully reviewing the comments submitted by consulting editors, winnowing out the most useful suggestions, a task that many editors don't do very well, if at all, adding his own suggestions, and asking the author to revise the manuscript provided it stood a chance of being accepted. Manuscripts often had to be revised several times before they were accepted, but the bottom line was that the quality of the published ETR&D manuscripts during Steve's tenure was almost always excellent. During Steve's tenure, it was not easy to get published in ETR&D. I know this personally because in several cases, manuscripts I submitted were not published. Speaking of which, Steve, some 30 years later, I'm still editing one of those manuscripts. Is there any chance you might convince the current editor to reconsider it for publication? Dr. Michael Melenda. His book, Steve's book, Getting Started in Instructional Technology Research, co-authored with Gary Morrison, became the foundational work for Indiana University doctoral students from its first publication in 1995. Subsequent editions continued to keep it relevant and indispensable to the doctoral program in instructional systems technology. I suspect that Ross's book kickstarted more academic careers than any other book. Steve's research has been far and wide in instructional design and technology, as well as program evaluation. For me, he's been a mentor and once deemed himself akin to Mighty Mouse, swooping in to save the day. He's also very skilled with analogies. He's a prolific researcher, a name anyone in the field of instructional design and technology knows and cites often. And at CRE, he continues Bob's mission regarding evidence, between continuing to build our program evaluation shop and evidence dissemination efforts. Congratulations.
This is where they trust a dean to hit two buttons, and apparently I've done that. Congratulations. So thank you, Jennifer. Many thanks as well to President Daniels and Nancy Madden for honoring us and sharing their thoughts on this occasion. Now it's time for the man himself. scared me. As you know, School of Education professor Stephen M. Ross is Executive Director of the Center for Research and Reform in Education. In 2019, he was awarded the Michael Specter Career Achievement Award from the Association of Education Communications and Technology. I'm skipping some things here. Over the past 15 years, Steve has developed and led CRE's evaluation unit, which specializes in conducting formative and summative studies of educational products and services. A School of Education faculty member since 2009, he also serves as our interim Associate Dean for Faculty Affairs for the remainder of this academic year, services for which I am deeply grateful. In addition to his academic bona fides, which I'll get to in just a second, I think it's important to share that since I arrived at Hopkins in 2017, I have been lucky to have Steve as a thoughtful faculty member and thought partner. He's someone to whom I can reach out when I'm contemplating how to push an agenda forward, and he will listen patiently and always offer a few wise words that provide the guidance needed. He's been there, he's done that. Nothing I say to him can shake him. Steve is also the author of 6 textbooks and over 140 journal articles covering educational technology, at-risk learners, educational reform, extended learning time, research and evaluation. He is Research Editor Emeritus of the Journal of Educational Technology Research and Development and a member of the editorial boards of several others. Before he joined us at Hopkins, Steve held the Lillian and Maury Moss Chair of Excellence in Urban Education and a Foudry Professorship at the University of Memphis, and was the first faculty recipient of the university's top award for teaching, research, and service. He has testified on school restructuring research before the U.S. House of Representatives, Subcommittee on Early Childhood, Youth, and Families, and has served as a consultant to the NSF on project evaluation design. Colleagues and friends, please welcome our inaugural Robert E. Slavin Endowed Professor, Stephen M. Ross.
I can tell you this is all overwhelming. Many people here have probably given many speeches. I have. You can talk at a college graduation, to an auditorium filled with people, to an arena. But it's so different to have the meaningful people in your life all together, at one place. It's an emotional moment. It makes me appreciate all of you, the memories, and quite frankly, miss Bob and, seeing the video. I want to tell a very personal story, but I do want to acknowledge people here, President Daniels, your presence here. I know you have a busy schedule. Dean Morphew, your support and faith in me to accept the chair. My family, Bob Slavin's family, my colleagues, people from the center, and I'll have more to say about you, who are carrying Bob's legacy forward, and we'll talk about that. And Jennifer Morrison, who has made me convinced that I like meta-analysis after all. I was told that I should speak for about 10 minutes, and I know the people, my colleagues in the center, were feeling very skeptical because they don't think I could even ever speak that succinctly, and are probably thinking, will you do that at the next staff meeting? I'm not sure that I can keep to that level, but I will try my best. I want to tell a personal story, a story of a friendship, a story of collegial cooperation. And it started here in Baltimore for me 38 years ago. I was invited by the textbook publisher to meet with Bob Slavin. By the way, 38 years ago, we were rather young. We were prodigies, had completed middle school, I think, about that time, for those of you who are the quantitative statisticians doing the math. I was meeting and Jennifer Morrison told some of this story, to share a video with Bob that Gary Morrison, my colleague from the University of Memphis, put together with different vignettes, with rising amateur actors in it. And I expected to see Bob in this high-rise modern building. I had an address on Charles Street, never been to Hopkins before. Instead, I found myself in front of this renovated house that looked like it had been there forever. I checked the address, it was right, walked in, there was nobody there, it was dark. I was climbing these creaky stairs, looking into offices, there were no names, went to the next floor, ended up in the attic, finally, after about 15 minutes. And there was Bob Slavin, in a pose that many of you who have known Bob for a long time have seen hundreds of times. Hunched over a yellow pad, surrounded by books and journals, writing. And I would see that image again, and I see people remembering that. That was Bob. He was friendly. We talked. We talked about educational research. We talked about the future of education. He watched the video. He did like that Piagetian thing and the very bright girl who was at the concrete operation stage. And we said goodbye, but promised to collaborate. And over the next few years, Bob involved me in research. And that was a change for me. That was a paradigm change, a change in my career that made such a difference. And President Daniels, a few weeks ago, you wrote a thought piece called The Duty of Care. And it did touch me. And we actually read these things that you write. Go figure. But for those of you who haven't read it yet, it was about his experience as a young law student where he read about a particular case. And that case changed his perspective, and I hope I'm doing justice, on what law should do and what a societal commitment should be. And it probably influenced the rest of your career. My experience with Bob Slavin turned me to a duty of giving back. I was not satisfied with, I was successful in my career. I was staying ahead of perishing by doing enough publishing, but my research was basic. And I really felt from the bottom of my heart that no practitioner, no teacher or principal would ever read any publication I ever wrote. My mother was a second grade teacher, even she wouldn't read them. And I wanted a way of giving back. And Bob involved me in the research where we went out to schools. I got a chance to see programs in action and learn what makes a program successful. And why does a given program work so successfully at one school and is a disaster at another? And I learned firsthand from being out there. But the most gratifying thing was the practitioners actually read our reports. Not all of them. It was not beach reading, but we left them with something. We left them with, here's what you could do to make things better. And so over the next 25 years, that's what I did. And after 25 years, 2009, the same year that you joined JHU, Bob saw an opening and I came here and we were able to work together. And then 5 years later, the girl in the video, and thankfully she had reached formal operations in Piagetian theory, joined us, Jennifer Morrison. And a few years later, as she mentioned, she and Bob started writing a proposal to IES. And it was the last proposal Bob wrote, I think it was in 2021, before he passed away. And a year later, that proposal was accepted. And this year, I was invited to work with Nancy on Bob's textbook because when I showed up 38 years ago and walked up those creaky steps, that was the first edition of the textbook. I joined Nancy and for Susan Davis, who does so much for the textbook, on the 14th edition, which is coming out this May, and that's amazing. And so that brings us up to today, and we're here to celebrate Bob. But the time that I spent with Bob, 2009, what was it, 12 years? One of my most favorite things is about once every 6 weeks, 2 months at the most, Bob, Nancy, and I would go to dinner. And these were great dinners, not for the food, although Bob loved the Chesapeake Bay crabs and other foods. But the great thing is for the first part of the dinner, we would talk about family. It was always about family. And to Bob's family, and some of you joined us at the dinners, Benjamin a couple of times, but I know all about you. I followed you all the way through your childhood, and I lived your lives vicariously. And to my family, they know all about you. So if you talk to them, just tell it like it is, because they heard the stories. But after we were done talking about family, because that was so important and so therapeutic, Bob would always say, and those of you who have known him, you could picture him doing this. Okay, I have an idea. And Nancy and I would sigh and say, what now? These were not small ideas about changing pods in the coffee machine. These are ideas about changing the world in education, making a difference. And Bob had many of those ideas. But I think the most impactful is that Bob imagined a day, and think about this. He imagined a day when in every school and every district in America, and actually globally, decisions would be made about what programs to implement, what strategies to use, not based on media hype. Bob, after a glass of wine, would get mad and call it snake oil. Not based on word of mouth, but based on evidence. Bob was an impatient sort. That might explain some of that rain story. And he didn't want to wait for the What Works Clearinghouse and federal programs. They were too slow. The What Works Clearinghouse reviewed 20 studies a year, and there are hundreds of studies produced every year. So what did he do? He developed his own clearinghouse, Evidence for ESSA, and put that into place. And over the years, we in the center, with Bob and after Bob, have grown that legacy. And Evidence for ESSA in a given year reviews upwards of 400 studies. It has about 1,100 studies online for people to read about. It has something like 8,000 users of the website a month, 100,000 a year, hundreds of thousands over the years, and it is growing. Bob's dream is not wishful thinking. Every year it is coming more and more true, and we are trying to continue the legacy. Johns Hopkins, the School of Education, the Center for Research and Reform in Education, we are the evidence center of education of the nation. And in addition to that, we conduct 60 or so original studies a year, evaluations that go in. Henderson Hopkins is one of those studies we're doing. We're in the process of evaluating it. So, a legacy can be an historical thing where you think back of something that somebody did, or it could be a dynamic thing and an historical thing. A legacy that's continually growing, getting larger and larger. And that's what's happening here. And in the School of Education, I feel so fortunate because we had a town hall this morning, and this is a school that is seeing potential, not only in evidence, in health areas, in technology, in AI, in public policy. And we're charged up. I am indeed a lucky person to be starting a second half century of a career with, I think, the same enthusiasm I had when I began. So we have work to do. I can't wait, but I guess as us, maybe to quote the scholar Scarlett O'Hara, we'll worry about that tomorrow. Tomorrow is another day. Today is a day to celebrate Bob Slavin and what he gave us. So thank you for the opportunity.
No one else needs such a I want to thank everyone who found time in their schedule, including President Daniels, to join us, that joined us for the dedication of the Robert E. Slavin Endowed Professorship at the School of Education and the inaugural installation of Steve Ross in that chair. I would like to close today's event by presenting Nancy. I did close today's event by presenting Nancy and Steve with a memento to mark this special occasion. And I'm so glad that we could get here today on Bob's birthday and have this celebration of his legacy and of Steve's incredible work. Thank you again. I hope you'll stay and join us for a reception honoring our special guests.